Hi, both. Apologies for the delay.
Worries.
Great. I'll call the meeting to order at 5:05. And if we can promote Daniel Cahill to a panelist, that'd be great. I don't know if anyone else is here. Sorry, navigating back to the agenda. Great. So we have an agenda. I do wonder if, to some extent, it would be good to give an update before we get into the camping. Sorry, to give an update on the camping ordinance review and discussion before we go into public forum. So I think, as most folks know, committees are a little bit less formal, and so we have an opportunity for public forum at the beginning. But I wonder if folks would be open to us having a discussion, and then we'll save space for public forum before we go into any substantive or any votes. But I think it might be helpful for folks to hear a little bit more about where we're at before they give their comments. So with that, I would either take an amended agenda if folks wanted to move that around, to have a presentation and then public forum and then discussion, or can just leave it open to attendees to know that they don't have to speak at public forum and they can wait until we've had some level of discussion. Go ahead, Sarah.
Who's speaking on, who's doing the presentation?
Yeah, it's mostly going to be me. Yeah, so I think just an explanation of like where we're at.
You're going to provide us with that?
Yes.
Okay, so we're not hearing from the city attorney?
Correct.
So that is a change in the agenda.
I mean, the agenda just has camping ordinance review discussion. Yeah.
I mean,
so
that had been the intent, that it be this city attorney.
Correct.
Is Dan gonna present, or he just is?
I think Dan's just here for questions. Correct.
Okay. Since that is not having the city attorney is a substantive change, I think it would be useful to hear from you what information you have and can share with us. And then have those in the public forum present whatever thoughts they have, and then move back to basically what this committee's next steps are going to be. I hadn't envisioned that we were going to have large votes. I had envisioned we were going to get a presentation and then talk about, how we go forward with whatever information we had been imparted. So I guess we can save that discussion for the tail end and let you update us in the front end.
So maybe a motion to move the agenda with a new item to B or 2.1 or whatever we want to call it. That is quick presentation on current status.
I will so move that.
I'll second that.
Great. Moved by Councilor Carpenter, seconded by Councilor McGee. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? That is our agenda. The second item of our agenda is the minutes from May 24th. Did folks have a chance to review those?
Yep.
Great.
I'll make a motion to approve those.
Great. Thank you. Motion made by Councilor McGee, seconded
Second.
by Councilor Carpenter. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and that passes unanimously. And then, so to give an update, the city council asked the city attorney's office to do a review of the proposed ordinance and the language that included. Just so I can read it back so I'm not just guessing it. The city's attorney's office shall lead a review of the proposed ordinance on camping in parks or other municipal lands and submit to the city council a report on the benefits, precedents, and possible concerns about the changes in comparison to our policies by April 15th. City Attorney Richardson was unable to finish that review before he went on vacation, which means we postponed it once. And then, of course, he departed for another job before he was able to finalize it. However, before he left, he was able to give an initial review, which was sent, by my understanding, to the mayor's office. I have not seen this review. I don't think that my fellow commissioners have seen this review. And it was addressed to the mayor's office, so not to us, even though the city council asked for that review. Since then, he has left. Haley has taken over. I should know Haley's last name, but I don't. McLanahan has taken over the review. There's been some, I guess, uncertainty. I feel like she hasn't had a clear understanding of like how prioritized this is by the city council or the administration. Wasn't clear that this had been assigned by the city council as opposed to by an individual counselor or by the committee, which of course, if it's done by a counselor or committee, that means it's not necessarily prioritized by the administration and staff just because of limited resources. And so she hasn't moved forward on doing any additional work. I have asked the mayor's office for the initial review because I think that would actually be really helpful to at least get started on discussion more than a line by line legal review, because that would at least give us some sense of direction. But we do not have that in hand. So that is where we are in the legal review. I need to connect with the mayor's office basically to see what we can get, if it needs to be an executive session for some reason. But to get as much legal review as we currently have access to, that's already been done. And then to give Haley some direction on how much further legal review to do. And that is my update.
Okay. So what you're saying is there's an initial review that's been done, but we've not seen it. Just for the record, you know, in April, before you became chair, I did have several conversations with Attorney Richardson that we would want this, and we actually had a tentative date before, if you trace back our emails. So I am surprised that that message didn't get to the city attorney's office. I have no problem doing this in, I'm just going to say bits and pieces, not piecemeal, but there's a significant amount of information packed into the proposed ordinance. So in fact, it may be useful to kind of start in batches of inquiry, you know, starting kind of at a higher level and then working our way down through the various proposals. And I think we need, and we can do this at the end, provide some guidance on that we can't, we're sort of stuck going forward until we can get some, at least some big pieces out on the table. I think a lot of the detail that's in the ordinance, the proposal can wait in a sense because it's quite specific and really relates to the more to the top line decisions, I think. So that's just sort of my 2 cents worth to pass on. I guess when we get to next steps, we can sort of flush that out.
Great. Thank you for that background. Joe, before I come to you, just want to make sure, because we just had presentation and I think Sarah just gave information that was helpful for background. But I do want to give folks, if that was it kind of in terms of presentation, to go to public forum before we get into discussion.
Absolutely, everything makes sense.
Then hopefully folks got that background. I know there's a few more folks joining us, but and I apologize. This definitely has been a miscommunication between myself and the city attorney's office and the mayor's office, which I wish I had figured out that was the case a little bit earlier, so I'd have had a little bit more time to figure it out. And I'm sorry, because I know folks have come to this meeting several times hoping to be part of this discussion, and we keep putting it off because of first the turnover and now some miscommunication. But want to give folks the chance to comment. And we don't do signups, do we? So is it just by hand?
I do have a few people who signed up by email, so we will give them priority because they signed up ahead of time. And then after that, anyone else who wants to speak, just go ahead and use the raise hand function or the chat function. And if you're struggling with that, you can always email ccurtis@burlingtonvt.gov, and I'll make sure we get you on.
Thanks, Christine. So I'll let you manage
Yes.
going through the email list.
Sure. So first we have Marilyn Richardson. So I'll move her over now.
Marilyn, you should be able to speak if you unmute. And optionally, I think you can turn your camera on.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi. All right. I've been following this since the change to the ordinance came out. And I've been generally concerned because I realize there are some real issues with homelessness. Believe me, I work to support that financially as well as a volunteer. But I truly believe that camping in our parks is not the solution. And I can give you an example of what happened this weekend. So this weekend, I live across the street from Callahan Park on Gove Court. And I went out to walk my dog, as I usually do in the park. And I went in my straight little line I was going to go. And on the hill is a tent. And lying out on the ground were 2 men with bare chests just lying there. Actually, you could think almost they might have been dead. And it made me so uncomfortable that I changed my direction that I was going to go. And I've lived across from this park for a long time. And that that was very unsettling. Plus, the amount of trash in the park related to people being there has just increased. And the group of us that pick up the trash have not done so as much as we'd like because of the drug issues and paraphernalia, et cetera. The other point about the camping in the park is when I was out in the park yesterday morning with some other dog owners, I was chatting with this woman, and she said that the people that live on the other side of Shelburne Road won't allow their children to walk up the hill past the tent. They don't feel it's comfortable for their children. So I believe the parks are for our children and our families and not as a place for camping. There's another person here, Ann Vaselli. who also would like to speak with you. Are you there?
Great. So we're gonna, oh, you mean is with you in person?
Yeah, she's in with me in person. We're both signed on to your meeting.
Great. That's fine. And if you can just say your name again
Yeah.
for, so Christine can get it for the record.
Yes, my name is Ann Vaselli, Dr. Ann Vaselli. I've been on Gove Court now for 3 years. And when I purchased this home 3 years ago, the park was a beautiful place to be. It was a beautiful place to walk my dog, enjoy the night, enjoy the sunset. And in recent times, it has become increasingly uncomfortable for me to be in the park. And I'm a grown professional adult. So I feel that I no longer want to walk in the park as I did. I don't feel comfortable walking in the park, particularly in the later hours of the day. And I think, again, echoing what Marilyn has said, I think the park should be used as a place for enjoyment in the community, for the residents who live near the park, for the residents who've purchased their homes and raised their families near the park. This park, Callahan Park, hosts a lot of children, hosts a lot of race tennis games and soccer games. I don't need to tell you what this park hosts. And I think it's really inappropriate for people to be camping in tents in our city park when children and families are trying to enjoy it. And I've been a physician for 30 years, and I work in a very difficult area. I work in Randolph, Vermont, and I understand homelessness and drug use. But again, the solution is not to allow people camping in our public parks. That's just, in my opinion, an unacceptable solution. The trash problem has become significant. We all pick up trash, but as Marilyn said, I feel increasingly unsafe picking up trash. There are needles and syringes. And again, this park should be enjoyed by the people and the families in this neighborhood. And I think it's not being used in that manner because of the camping in the park. I think that it's not an acceptable solution. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Anne.
Okay, next I'm going to promote Joel Baird.
Rachel, you should be able to unmute.
It takes a while for things to show up here. Can you read me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, I've spoken before in some detail about my concerns about the proposed ordinance, and I salute I guess the two people who put it together, primarily Gene Bergman and Joe McGee, for really putting a lot of time and effort into something that could be ideally generous and incredibly compassionate. But the lack of any legal vetting with the city attorney is a concern. And I don't think there's any way that the committee can make an informed decision on the future of this without a really considered look at it by a lawyer other than Gene. Now, my major concerns, I mean, I'm no legal giant, believe me, but I look at this and there's a great deal of language here that is up for interpretation by various enforcement officers and people who pass by. There's a discretion on what constitutes an immediate threat or an environmental hazard. Is someone's waste flowing into Lake Champlain? That's not an immediate danger necessarily. But the document is in my opinion, riddled with some problems and needs some serious tweaking, to the point where I think the city has trouble enforcing the ban on camping in city parks it currently has. And I think there's services, social services are really stretched. And I think perhaps a total ban isn't the answer, but it certainly answers the question, hey, can anyone who comes to Burlington set up a tent? Who's going to determine whether this person is houseless? Who's going to determine whether or not this person is here for a concert? And who is going to ask those questions? And who is going to believe the answers? It is unambiguous to say, hey, no camping in city parks, but you can park. I mean, you can camp in A, B, and C locations. But if word gets out that, yeah, we've eliminated the prohibition and there are a lot of provisions for helping people to relocate, and they're given grace periods, all of this is incredibly generous. And one of my questions is whether or not the city can afford to be generous, because this proposed ordinance says, well, if they're kicked out of or relocated from a park that's not appropriate or a location, they're guaranteed another spot within the city limits. And within the city limits is not the border for this problem. It's a regional and bigger problem than that. I mean, someone who arrives in Burlington prepared to rent or buy a home, they're not guaranteed residency in this fair city. And I think this ordinance risks being a seasonal invitation to people who rightly believe that Burlington is a generous and compassionate place to be. And I think we can keep it compassionate and generous without making some pretty big mistakes with this ordinance. So anyway, I don't want to yak on all evening, believe me, but I would like to hear sometime over the course of this meeting what Dan Cahill sees as the pros and cons of this. Because as far as I've heard from Cindy White, who's the head of Parks and Rec and Waterfront, this would present an enormous challenge on top of what are already enormous challenges to enforcement, law enforcement, as well as just maintenance of parks. There's too much discretion here. Excessive, what's substantial? Who's going to decide under which administration will these definitions be changed? It's going to be so fluid over the course. It's going to depend on the political appetite for rules, basically. And I think that's no way to set a policy that, for the most part, says, hey, parks are for kids and they're for people who can't afford to take vacations elsewhere. So anyway, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Joel. And we will continue the public forum, and when it's done, any of the committee members or Dan, if he wants to, can weigh in on reflections.
Hi, does this mean I'm up? Sorry. Am I going?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I was talking to myself, I guess, for a few seconds there. Next up, we have Sam Powers. Go ahead, Sam.
Hi, hello and good afternoon or evening, I don't know, everyone. My name's Sam and I'm a resident of downtown Burlington. I know many people tonight are speaking in opposition to this policy proposal, and I think their concerns are totally valid. Safety and security is absolutely valid, but I just want to to stress that this proposal is not intended to legalize camping citywide. To the contrary, I think this policy would obviously establish a framework for prohibiting camping on certain public property. And more importantly, and what seems to be the impetus for this policy, is the need for a standardized framework for various city departments to handle houseless encampments and to provide our houseless neighbors with stability and due process. The Sears Lane incident proved the need to clarify what humane and responsible policy in regards to camping looks like and what this ordinance is trying to do. I hope the City Council and this committee more specifically will not bow to the pressure exerted by those who may misunderstand this policy and those who believe this pragmatic and straightforward proposal is somehow a slippery slope. And to more directly respond to the previous speaker who said that policies are, quote, going to depend on the political appetites of the day, I would just say, isn't that what democracy is? Yes, I think the reason why this is somewhat vague is because it's open to public interpretation, and what our current elected officials and administrative officials believe is most prudent at the time. And again, it's to provide a framework for due process for those who have been largely deprived of safety and security and whose lives have been criminalized. Thank you so much for letting me speak.
Thank you for speaking, Sam. Sorry, I feel like I have a comment after all of them. So hopefully at our next meeting, we will have a legal review. And then I think it's actually nice that we're hearing from folks again this time, and then maybe we'll have more time for discussion next time. Thank you, Sam. Christine.
Yes, and I think I accidentally moved Counselor Carpenter instead of Sam. I'm just struggling tonight. I apologize. Let me just get organized here. I'll bring Sarah back and we'll move Sam to attendee. Sorry about that, Sarah. Okay. Next, we have Gail Rafferty.
Great, Gail. So you should be able to unmute.
Great. Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. Hi, everyone. As always, to all three of you, thank you so much for all the work you do constantly on behalf of all of us living here in Burlington. I know you're working hard on a lot of issues. I'd like to address the issue of whether camping in public parks is compatible with other park activities. I think our first two speakers address that as well. And the reason I want to is that Councilor Bergman did indicate that he, in a written communication to our neighborhood group, that he really didn't see an issue with there being any incompatibility with park activities and camping, and acknowledged in a previous Zoom meeting that camping could be for any reason. It might be because of houselessness, it might be because of tourism, it might be because students are visiting UVM, and that there's no way this ordinance would determine or legally should or could determine, which I'd certainly agree with. If you're allowed to camp, you wouldn't have to prove why you're camping, I would think. Anyway, I just think our neighborhood strongly disagrees with this notion that camping in Burlington's parks is compatible with the activities of the park. And I'll just give the most recent example, which is a tent that went up a few days ago, right by the children's slide, right smack dab in the middle of the children's playground. And again, I'm not there right now, but apparently, according to many of my neighbors and various witnesses, that tent has syringes in it, possibly has fecal matter and blood in it. And that doesn't seem compatible with a children's playground. And that tent did end up abandoned. I think that tent ended up being moved by somebody who was not its owner or a city official. And certainly we wouldn't condone that. But I think this incompatibility thing is real, and to say that it's not, and that we, meaning residents that live near a park, have I've had 25 years experience with that park, and before that Pomeroy Park. I think it's naive, and I think it could lead to a lot of really bad situations, some of which our neighbors have already experienced over the last 2 summers. So I'll leave it at that. And I just want to put that question out there about whether camping is compatible with park activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail.
Okay, there was one more person with their hand up, so I'll move over, Leslie Williams.
Great, and I think that means that we're through the email list, and so if anybody in the attendees, we've got quite a few, there's 21 folks want to speak, you can, this is the time to raise your hand. And Leslie, we should be able to hear you if you unmute.
Hi, this is Jerry Williams, Leslie's husband. Thank you all for spending time being here. I'm gonna unfortunately have to say something that Gail had just mentioned. I've written up a few notes, so bear with me. I live near Smalley Park. At the last meeting with this committee, one of your members asked for examples of some issues we might have witnessed that might be a problem regarding the proposed ordinance. Here is one example. Last Friday night, a tent was erected in a children's play area of the park. It was erected within a few feet of the slides the children play on. Most parents I know of would be uncomfortable letting their kids play there with a tent so close by. I know when our son was young, we would have avoided this scenario. This was not a one-off event. Smalley Park neighbors witnessed this scenario many times last summer. There has to be a better way to accommodate tenters than by taking space away from day-to-day users of our small city parks. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I don't see any other attendees with their hand raised. So I'll switch it over to reflections by the committee and Dan if he wants. And just want to note again for folks that are maybe joined us a little bit late because we've got a few more attendees that we apologize. Specifically, I apologize that we haven't gotten the legal review completed yet. There's been some miscommunication between myself, the mayor's office, and the city attorney's office. And that is still something that we intend to move forward with, but appreciate folks staying attuned to this issue. And I'll turn it over to Sarah, Joe, and Dan if he wants for any reflections on what we just heard. Before we move to general discussion, go ahead, Joe.
I was just curious if we could also promote Sarah Russell and Marcella from CEDO to maybe give some updates with the city's efforts to address houselessness, sort of in context to the increase in camping that we've seen over the last few weeks. If that would be in line with this conversation.
Sure. Thanks. I think Christine's doing that. And then Sarah, or did you have anything else before you?
I think it would be good to hear from Dan and Sarah and Marcella before I give any more comments. So
Okay.
I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Great. So I'll give it to Sarah first, if that's okay. And then.
Just a couple things I wanted, and I'm happy to wait for the discussion. I've brought this up before, but as many of the speakers have said, I think there's a fundamental big picture discussion we need to have about camping, if where. There's a lot of detail in the proposal that doesn't answer that question. It just makes a presumption. So I just want, we've got a couple big picture questions and I'd like us to kind of wrestle with that. Maybe Dan himself can speak to this. We have a policy, and we probably should have posted it in some of our documents, so we can ask Christine to do that. And part of the legal review was to compare what we've got now to what is being proposed. So I just want to make sure that we get all of that on the docket, because we have had little discussion about kind of what is not working with the current. We've certainly heard the stories and concerns about enforcement of the policy, but enforcement of the policy may not be the same as flaws with the policy. So at some level, we need to have that discussion as well. And I think in terms of the city people, city staff, who are the, I would be interested in their comments about what works and what does not work with the current.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Dan, Sarah, Marcella, did any of you want to chime in or have thoughts?
I'm happy to just sort of talk generally. As you all know, I started my position with the city about 2 months ago. In that time, one of the things that after speaking with some folks from different departments, we identified that there was a need to come together as a group to coordinate a consistent response to encampments. So we had our first meeting last month, and Dan was part of that, as well as Marcella and a bunch of other staff. And I think that a great deal of time was sort of spent on identifying some current camps that were slated for removal. I think there were 3 at the time. And I think one of the things that we struggle with right now is that for the majority of the folks who we identified on this list for removal, that there's not really a spot for them to go. So I think that, we don't have safe camping areas in the city. There are people that don't have other options. I know that Lacey and her team were part of that meeting, and Dan can certainly attest. I know even prior to my time at the city, they do everything that they can to reach out to folks and try to engage them and connect them with appropriate resources for shelter or emergency motel. And in the cases where people are camping, it's usually because they can't access those resources. So pulling apart their camp in accordance with the policy, with the timeframes and storing and tagging their items is fine. However, it leaves the person without another option for shelter. And so I know from sort of a human perspective, I can say transparently, I think I think our group kind of struggles with that a little bit, that we don't have pulling down someone's camp and following the policy as it is doesn't really result in them being able to access safe shelter. It really just removes what they had in place for safety of their shelter. So I don't know if maybe that's how I could, speak specifically to the encampment piece, I think. I don't know. We also had a recent situation just arise last week where there was the Champlain Parkway contractors identified a couple of a camper in one situation, and we're working to try to find a spot to relocate the camper. So we're trying to be as creative as possible in relatively very short windows of time. And I guess that's the update I would provide. Dan and Marcella, do you want to weigh in more? You've been around longer than I, so.
Sarah, can I ask a question? Can you, not this minute, but provide us with some data on how many people we're talking about? And when you say you can't find a place, obviously it's confidential, but what do you mean you can't find a place? Are they ineligible for a motel? Have they Are they not allowed into a motel? Do they not choose to go to the motel? You know, when you say can't find a place, what is the can't? Because I don't think we're going to solve this unless we understand, okay, they can't find a place. What is it more specifically that could be an option? And what's the breadth of numbers that we're talking about? So I just would really ask if you could, as best you can, get that information for us.
Sure. I mean, I think right now, the last time I checked in with Lacey, she was aware of at least 20 campers. I don't think we're seeing encampments right now with groups of people camping together. We're seeing more sort of individual or a couple campers together at this point. So I think that, I don't know, maybe there's more than that, but the last time that I checked in with her, she had asserted that there were about 20 or so. And in terms of people not being able to access other services, that is the case almost, I would say 90 at least % of the time, you know, where they were not able to be successful in the motel setting. They, you know, one person in particular I know got a service animal at the motel. The motel said that they couldn't have the service animal there, so kicked them out. I think that there are varying degrees of patience with, you know, motel management in terms of some households that have challenging behaviors around mental health or substance use. And I think that those are generally, from my perspective, my sense is that folks just don't have other options. So that's why they're camping, I think. I also want to say too, just one more thing about that is that we all know as a, you know, statewide, the economic services will be, has operated under a extremely relaxed, very, very low barrier eligibility for their motel, emergency motel stays across the state due to COVID. And those relaxed eligibility are going away starting July 1st. And we were supposed to get some numbers from economic services this week. Marcella, we don't have those yet. No, we were supposed to get some numbers from economic services to understand how many people that was going to leave unsheltered, and we don't have that yet. Last we knew that I think there were it was around 500 people statewide who had not signed, who were not either eligible or not signed on for this new program starting July 1st, considering that Chittenden County holds about 1/3 of the state's homeless population. That is a significant number of people that could be unsheltered starting July 1st. So wanted to just say that too.
And I know you can't answer this, but I'm really struggling with, if resources weren't the problem, and they are, what is it that should be provided? Particularly, I'm focused on that 20-25 person group. What is it, if you had more resources, you might be able to provide? I mean, and I guess saying we can't do it doesn't help us answer how we're going to do it. And perhaps sanctioned camping is an option in between, but I really need to get my arms around what is it we should be advocating for. What is it we should be advocating for?
Yeah, I mean, I think that permanent housing is obviously ideal. Low barrier permanent housing is even better, paired with rental assistance and sustained, you know, supportive services for folks, you know, recognizing that they, you know, may cycle in and out of homelessness before they have, you know, each time they may have a longer stint of, you know, of being successful. So I think that's kind of that sort of three-pronged approach of affordable housing, rental assistance, and services. I think I don't need to tell any of you right now, we have a huge lacking of affordable housing in Burlington. When we look at, you know, the numbers, we're seeing about 200, I think the last count in April was around 246 households that were chronically homeless, meaning that they've had a stint of homelessness for longer than 12 consecutive months and have a disabling condition. And then when we look at, new housing that's being built and the number of new dedicated units that are specifically for homeless people, between now and December, there are 8. So I think when we, think about we are developing housing, I think it's just there's not enough of it, and there's not enough of it that's low barrier, I would say. In the meantime, we do need to focus on temporary shelter and temporary living situations that are safe and supportive for people while they are waiting to move into housing.
I appreciate all that. And I guess I just trying to get a little more, like, for example, if there were more intense services coupled with a motel room, would that help? I mean, we can only build permanent housing so fast. That's a huge problem. So what is it that might be done with what we've got at the minute would be useful to understand?
I think that a lot of it, I think a lot of the challenge right now is the changing eligibility on the state level for the emergency motels. And I don't really know that there's a whole lot. People are either eligible or they're not. So I think that there's, that's a huge challenge that feels like it's kind of outside our hands at this point. I think that we're, as you all know, the city is working really hard on developing the Elmwood parking lot into an emergency shelter community. We're seeing a lot of pushback from a few neighbors in the surrounding areas. And I understand their concerns, as I understand people, speaking about finding a tent with syringes on a playground, which I know it isn't necessarily aligned with the policy that you're proposing, the changes that you're proposing anyway. But if those same people are concerned about, the tent at the playground, let's support the emergency shelter community so that people are not leaving syringes at a playground, so that we're able to give them a safe place to stay. And so I think that it's a conflict, right? And so we don't want, to have people camping and spending time, using or whatever, they're doing in the park that people are uncomfortable with. But we also don't want to support emergency shelter, alternatives. So I think that that's kind of the struggle. I think we have, a temporary solution that we could, that could really help to alleviate some of the camping challenges.
I'll stop asking my questions, but I think in the short-term mode, the city very quickly needs, if we're going to look at safe camping sites, to identify where those ought to be. And my personal opinion very strongly is cannot be in a public park. So I'm passing that on to you and Marcella and to the city folks to try to work on that, to give us some information. There were, I understand, at least 10 sites identified for the pod community, and for varied reasons not chosen. Are any of those appropriate? I don't know. I mean, I think, I feel like I don't want to spin my wheels here, but I'm anxious to get information where we could provide some clearer alternatives.
Great, not to stray too far from the discussion. Marcella or Danielle, did you have specific comments you wanted to add or thoughts?
I'll just Joel's question about pros and cons. So he'd asked what my opinion or thought was in terms of the pros and cons of the policy. I think the pros are that, it's acting as a medium for conversation about this. I think, Sarah, you were right that this is a really big issue that needs to be looked at that way. And so I think that's one of the pros is it's another connective point to have conversation and to explore this. You know, from a practicality standpoint of what it's like out in the field. So my work with the Parks Department, I focus in on our conservation areas, so our community gardens, our conservation lands, our trails, the bike path. You know, it's you know, in the day-to-day, any folks that are out there in these situations have a unique circumstance. So I think you know, the policies are good, they're guideposts, and they're things that help us understand what the parameters and how we can work through a situation. But in actuality, each situation and each, you know, human in each situation has a unique circumstance. So, and I think I'm not saying anything new. This points to this, you know, the resource gap and some of the challenges of capacity that has been acknowledged. Yeah, and I think Sarah mentioned the meeting and the coordinated effort internally that that she is helping to lead, and I think that that's a bright spot of late, for sure. So I don't have any other comments that Sarah didn't cover really well.
Great. Thanks. And I think one reflection on what folks have said, and I think some of this is going too early, but I definitely, I think that there's at least been some verbal start to agreement among the committee that we aren't, like, if we're talking about anything, we're not talking about playgrounds, or we're not talking about baseball pitches or anything like that. Yeah, so I guess I want to make sure that we articulate that again for folks who haven't heard it. Go ahead, Sarah.
Dan, not tonight, but as I understand, it's like 22 parks in the city of Burlington. I would be curious if you could sort of, I guess, give us the list and sort of help us identify. I mean, Callahan and Smalley and Letty and North and Oakledge, City Hall Park. I mean, there's a list that just quickly rises to the top as being very inappropriate. They're public parks. There are lots of people walking through them, using them. That may not be the case with all of the city parkland. So I guess it'd be useful to kind of think in your head how you would identify, even if you choose to, you know, are there distinctions to be had? And that's kind of in addition to my ask of Sarah and Marcella or Cito around what else is out there under city control, so to speak. So I'm just tossing that out.
Right. And I think, I don't know if you, I don't, whatever makes the most sense for you in terms of answering this question, but I think that's also, I don't think I have a good understanding of like what is park land and what is municipal land. So I feel like a lot of the camps that I see are, you know, in the Intervale, or they're like on like near the Winooski River, like as you go into the New North End, and are places that aren't recreational in the like, you know, like I know nothing about Parks and Rec, obviously, but more in the like recs part of the Parks and Rec than in the parks part of the Parks and Rec. And so I think none of us have an understanding of like what that land is designated as in the city, and what is parks and what is like conservation and what is recreational parks.
We partially had this conversation, I believe, didn't we, Sarah, in the meeting that we had together with folks from Parks and DPW when we were looking at the city ordinance that governs parks, and I think there are some fairly clear definitions within there. But I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to stop speaking now.
Thanks, Marcella. That's good to know.
I can touch briefly on the conversation that Jean and I had with the Conservation Board at the beginning of May. And sort of, I think, continue the conversation from there. Before I do that, I think I would like to speak a little bit to some of the comments we heard during the public forum. You know, I think trash in our parks is definitely a concern. Having a tent in close proximity to a playground is not ideal. I think what the intent of this ordinance is to offer that clarity and say, you know, this is absolutely a place where we would want to control regulate camping and not and say explicitly you cannot put a tent here. And then, you know, there's a possibility that we could establish a timeline that is acknowledges that immediacy of the need to relocate folks. And I think, Sarah, speaking to your point about, you know, having a place where we can do that, and I think that addresses a lot of the concerns that city staff currently have with the policy that is in operation today, is that, you know, when we come across a site, if there's no cut and dry, like, okay, you can't camp here, but here's a place where you can go to camp. I think this policy is, this ordinance proposal is pragmatic in that it acknowledges that people will camp outside. They will have no other option than to seek shelter outside. And we're doing a disservice to ourselves and to folks that are camping outside by not acknowledging that fact. So, you know, I think, especially given the numbers that Sarah just gave us about, you know, how many folks could potentially be unsheltered when the parameters change on July 1st. I think, you know, the urgency is there. So I hope that we can get the legal review and really begin to dig into this policy pretty soon, because I think, you know, we're going to get to September, October, and November, and a lot of these conversations are going to start to happen. And if we don't have something in place that says clearly, like, this is what the procedure is, then we're going to be in a similar situation that we were in last fall. And, you know, I don't want us to leave this conversation in a place where we're hoping for economic services to relax those restrictions again, so that folks are eligible for the motel voucher program. You know, we'll hope for that and we'll advocate for that, but to count on it, I think, leaves us in a precarious position. So I just want to make those remarks, and I will touch briefly on our conversation that we had at the Conservation Board last month, if that's something that would be helpful to folks. One of the questions that came up, I think, that the board shared was, you know, if we are allowing folks to camp on public land, that we're also ensuring that there's access to bathrooms and clean water. I know that's a conversation that we've had a number of times in this committee. The possibility of establishing excluded areas in the policy, I think, was something that a lot of the board members shared. And I think there's some openness to figuring out how we do that in the, maybe not the underlying ordinance, but the procedures. You know, I think one of the things that we discussed was, and Dan might be able to speak more eloquently to this than I can, but the ways certain landscapes shift year to year, and what might be considered a vulnerable area one summer, you know, that the plant life that exists in that area might shift. And so, you know, we can't just say in an underlying policy that, you know, this area is going forward permanently excluded. And, there was the thought that, excessive posting could degrade the experience of enjoying our parks or some of our trails. And I think, acknowledging also the substantial resources that would have to go into something like that. There is a path forward on that acknowledges both of those realities. And lastly, I think, which is also pretty important, Scott Gustin with permitting and inspections pointed out that there are a number of zoning ordinances that deal with recreational space and open space in the city. So I'm hopeful that the city attorney's review will touch on those and how those overlap with this potential ordinance. And that
Thanks,
is all I
Joe.
have from that meeting. Thank you.
Any other thoughts before I move us to the next agreement, or sorry, the next item?
Just I would ask Sarah and all, if you can, I don't know the best, I don't even know if you keep notes of these meetings, but if you could keep us informed about what you talk at the meetings, not necessarily all the great detail, but, I think it would be useful to understand, like Marcella mentioned, there was a discussion about public land. So I think helping us understand what you're talking about would be useful.
I'd be happy to share. I just take some quick, really rough notes, but I'd be happy to share them with you all. Oh, lost myself there. I'd be happy to share them with y'all.
Thanks.
Sure.
Then not seeing anything else, I'm going to take us to upcoming agenda items / other business. I'm wary of putting another meeting on the calendar before, just because we've postponed having a substantive discussion on this in terms of the legal review so many times that I don't want folks to put this on their calendar again and then us not have that discussion. So I feel like I need to work with the administration to get cleared out when we're going to have that legal review before we have another substantive discussion. One of the other things that's on our agenda that was referred to CDNR and charter change was the non-citizen voting, I believe we talked about last time. And charter change is meeting tomorrow. And they have it on their agenda, but it says time permitting. So I'm going to reach out to Jean and basically say, like, we said that we would do this, that you would at least invite the members. So it would be great if you could give us more of a heads up for when you're meeting to talk about this. I can make it at 10 o'clock tomorrow, even though that's kind of an odd time. And so I don't know if either one of you can, but I think I would either ask that
I'm on the committee.
Say it again.
I said I'm on the committee.
You're on the charter change? Did I know that?
So without quickly looking at the agenda, time may have shifted a little. We really, in terms of the charter change, we're pressing hard because we are looking at two smaller changes related to redistricting. The one that would allow us to vote on redistricting by the voters, not the legislature, and the other is the potential of consolidating polling places. That language is not particularly complicated, but when we scheduled this several weeks ago, that had to have priority because the timing was such. It appears that we're now shifting some of that, so that might be as urgent. I think in terms of the charter change discussion, I'm not sure what we're gonna, there's just been a few updates. Jillian Nanton from CEDO's been joining us in terms of giving suggestions on who to talk to, that kind of thing. I went and talked to the Board of Voter Registration simply to inform them that we were going to start looking at this. And there's a scheduled meeting, I think on the 21st, with trusted community voices to tell them that this, you know, we don't want anyone to be surprised that this is happening, but it's starting to happen. So it'd be great if you could join us. I'm not sure how much we're going to spend on the other items. We're trying to get those sort of completed and off our plate because I don't think they're that complicated. The two redistricting, the two little ones. Redistricting is complicated, but the other two things that might go with it aren't I don't think a big deal. And so I think it would be great to join in terms of talking about how much or not this committee wants and needs to be involved in those discussions. Chair Bergman is quite engaged around it, so you know we should sort of talk about how much work this committee needs to do on it versus the Charter Change Committee.
Great. Yeah, I think I don't even know that we need to. I'm always of dual minded on this, which I think that one committee is just a better place to have discussion in terms of talking about substance stuff and like getting to some consensus on council without working on last minute amendments on the council floor, while at the same time not wanting to slow down the process. So I just think, and not to completely put this on you, Sarah, but if you just get to a version in charter change that can come to CDNR when one of our meetings is happening anyway or something like that, I think it'd be good for us to look at it. But I don't necessarily know, since it was already technically referred to us, that we need to have another formal process for it coming to us.
There is a version actually that a draft the city attorney put together based on the Winooski and Montpelier charter changes that did pass the legislature. So maybe at our next meeting, we just ask Tim Devlin to come and go over it with us, and we can ask her. I suppose we could even have a joint meeting, but we certainly can ask Chair Bergman to join us and just make sure everyone's on the same page around the process and where we're going. I don't think the language is the issue, particularly since two communities have already passed it. And I think the real issue is going to be outreach and how does that get done, you know, in a broad way. So there is support for it. Because again, I don't think the language on that, and we actually had a draft from 2019, if you all recall, and predated all of us, but there was a proposal late 19 into 20, and then there was the conversation that there had not been enough outreach, so it got kind of pulled back, and I think that's when it got referred to this committee, like January, February of 20, and then COVID happened, and there it's been sitting, I think, since then.
Okay. Yeah, and I don't even know if we need to have Tim.
Back on what? I'm sorry, what?
Sorry, I'm not sure that we need to have Tim join per se if there's not a whole lot of questions on the legal aspect of it. Maybe we can just put it on the agenda. And especially if Jean's going to be there.
Yeah. I think we probably, yeah, I think so. It's like I said, I don't think that's everybody needs to understand what the words say, but I don't think it's hugely complicated.
Right. Great. Were you going to say something else, Sarah?
Circling back on our, I was going to say, you know, on our next, we obviously need the legal review, but I'm still anxious about how we sort of get to the top level question around, you know, yeah, it's sort of outside of what Joe's proposals are. I mean, do we want to allow any camping at all? I mean, there's sort of this big question that I feel like we're not answering. And the devil's in the details if we say yes. So maybe, I don't know. I guess it seems prudent just to wait till we get that legal review, which I hope can be soon, but.
Joe, did you have a?
Yeah, I would just say, I think waiting until we have the legal review makes the most sense, just so I think that will provide guardrails for our conversation, so we're not, digging through something that ultimately doesn't have any resolution. Yeah. So and I think hopefully we can get some clarity and maybe have that conversation next month. I don't want to totally understand where you're coming from, Zariah, on that. And so, but yeah, I do think it's important for us to get that before we can, dig into. In a lot of ways, we have this crafted product that looks like it's finished, and we're kind of trying to work our way backwards, which is the challenge. But yeah, so.
Yeah, and I think just to throw out my 2 cents, I think that's sometimes the problem with how Gene drafts things is it's almost too complete. And I do actually think that I think that maybe to make this work, we'll have to question the premise of you can camp anywhere unless we say you can't, to being like, actually the city is going to prioritize like some areas where if you have to camp, where it makes sense to do that. And so I think we've got a complete product, but maybe that started in the wrong direction. Not in the wrong direction, but in a direction that maybe isn't going to work for us.
Yeah, and just like a reminder of that sort of happened because Montpelier tried to sanction that and ran into their own issues with attempting to do that. So,
right.
I think, and we've heard from many folks that the ideal is offering sanctioned camping sites, whether that be for parking vehicles, folks experiencing short-term houselessness, or I could very easily fall back into having the actual conversation right now, so I won't do that.
Right.
But, yeah, I think that would be productive for us to come up with a series of questions to guide the conversation going forward.
Great.
Well, and for me, there's a lot packed in with what's proposed, and none of that, whether we change it or not change it, may answer the problems we've got. So, we have a policy now. What's the biggest flaw with that? And then what are options short term? We all know what the long-term options are. We just can't get there quick enough. And so for me, it's looking at it, does that need a wholesale ordinance change, or does it need policies and procedures that we might even change, I won't say month to month, but if we get 30 new emergency beds, that's a big difference. If we can get 20 more next fall, that's another big difference. So there's responsiveness depending on what's going on at any point in time.
To move the discussion along, I think, right, we'll talk to Jean or Sarah, you can keep us posted on, or maybe I'll just grab that text and put it on our next agenda. I'll loop back once I am sure enough of getting some kind of review to schedule our next meeting. And I think if we all want to come with like, what are the clear, like, railing questions in addition to any legal review that we want to answer, that would be helpful if we bring that to if we all bring that to the discussion.
Okay.
Anything else? Did I miss anything? And thanks for your patience on on me figuring this out.
Okay.
Great.
Okay.
Then next meeting TBD, and thanks everyone.
All right.
Thanks all. Have a
Thanks.
good night.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Christine.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.